Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Chef Zoe, and before we go into today's topic, I want to apologize for the sound issues on the last video. Today we have much better sound and we are good to go. Today I'm going to be taking you on another topic on cooking, basic cooking techniques I feel like you should have. This is one technique that since I mastered and I'm a sweet tooth person, has come a long way in making sure that I have desserts, I have like a nice cake, I have something nice always to serve my guests and for myself. Baking is one technique I feel like everybody should have. There's a science to baking and people tend to shy away from it because they think it's so complicated, but today I'm here to break it down into simple terms, let you know what baking is, how baking takes place, and give you one or two tips on how to elevate your baking game. I didn't start my career as an amazing baker, but I went to culinary school and I learned a few of these things that I'm about to share with you today. So it's going to make it a lot easier for you. So baking is a method of preparing food that uses dry heat in an enclosed space like an oven. And there are different types of baking, different methods of baking, but today we're just going to go to the simple one. I know every single one of us have an oven at home, so I'm just going to explain to you what baking is in the simple terms and give you a few tips and tricks that would elevate your baking game at home. So when baking, the heat comes in contact with the starch in your dough or your batter and causes it to change shape, and this is what and something we call the Maillard reaction takes place. So what is the Maillard reaction? This is culinary school right here, so I'm just going to give you this definition. Maillard reaction is the chemical reaction between amino acids and reducing sugars that causes the browning of food. So when you are baking, you find out that the outer surface of your food turns brown, becomes firm, while the inside part is soft, moist, because of all the moisture that has been trapped in it. Baking takes place from the outer surface. It starts from the outer surface. So the outer surface gets firm, starts to brown before the heat now travels to the center of the dough or the center of whatever you're making. Technically, you can bake all types of food. You can bake fish, you can bake potatoes. But today we're talking about baked goods. I'm going to be sharing with you a few tips and tricks on how I made this baking journey a lot easier for me. It wasn't my favorite thing to start with, but now I can bake whatever desserts and whatever things that I like. First, you need to understand your oven and the type of oven you have, because what people don't understand is when you see a recipe online and someone is giving you, oh, I baked this cake at so degrees centigrade, it's because you don't know the type of oven they have. You might have a different type of oven. So it's best, while you're using these recipes as your guideline, it's also best to know the type of oven you have. And by experience, that's the only way you can tell. Because while some of you might have really good ovens, some of you might have just barely there ovens. And some of you might have no ovens at all. But growing up, at the point when we didn't have an oven, I had an auntie who would bake a cake on a stove top with a pot, some sand, some sharp sand to actually, conduct the heat inside the enclosed space. Like I said, baking happens in an enclosed space. So that pot at that moment with a cover on and the hot sharp sand to conduct the heat in the enclosed space automatically turns that local setup into an oven. So whatever oven you have, as long as you understand it, there are a few things that you need to know. So let me just take you on my baking journey. First things first, your baking instruments are very important. The most important part of baking is baking is not like cooking where you can be pouring salt and maggi until your ancestors tell you you don't do. For baking, you have to have measurements. Measurements are very important. You cannot eyeball a recipe to get it accurately or to be consistent in taste and texture. For baking, that is where a lot of work comes into. Some would work with measuring cups and spoon. I know you guys know what a measuring cup and a measuring spoon is. This is just an example of what it looks like. Some recipes call for measuring cups and measuring spoons because that's what everybody technically would have at home. Some recipes might call for grams, kilograms, or whatever your scale. That is where a scale comes into play. There's some recipes at all that wouldn't even call for cups. I know I was practicing how to make sourdough, and I realized that every single thing had to be measured. The measurements were coming in grams, so I had to get a scale. So this is an example of a scale that I use. This is an electronic scale. It's an old one that I have been using. It's been working for me. So you can get an electronic scale. They also have manual scales that you can get, but if you really want to have good results every time you are baking, always make sure you have a scale or a measuring cup. If all you have is a measuring cup and you have a recipe that calls for grams, I think online you can find some conversion tables which are not really accurate but pretty much would do, that can convert things from grams into cups for you, cups and tablespoons, so that you're able to get close to accurate but not necessarily accurate. I'm sure you're able to, you know, find your way around that recipe. So those are very important. Then you have your baking equipment. You can't just start on the baking journey without having the proper equipment. You need a baking pan, something to bake in. That they have locally made ones. They have these ones that you buy off the supermarket. So it depends. You can get them from different places. You need to get good quality flour, and also understand that there are different types of flours. They have almond flour, they have AP flour, which is also known as all-purpose flour, which is basically the flour that we use for everything. But we also have bread flour, we have cake flour, we have pasta flour, but we have a lot of flours. But in Nigeria here, you might just find just a few and might have to just, you know, find your way across it. So most times if you can't find bread flour, for me, I would use an all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour can work for anything that you can't find, you know, except you're trying to do like, you know, they have special flours like gluten-free, you know, for medical stuff like that, people that don't eat gluten. I love gluten, so I don't. So you also need a spatula. This is an old trusty spatula I've been using for a while. You need your mixing bowls. You need a flour sifter. If you don't have a flour sifter, you can actually use a sieve, but I use a flour sifter, and you know, that's just a few of the things that you need to have. Whatever recipe you're trying to create, when you're doing your research on the recipe, find out if you need one or two things. For example, there's some bread recipes that you can mix in a bowl and just toss into a pot or a baking pan. There are some bread recipes that call for bread pans, like a loaf pan like this, and there are also some bread recipes that call for like a Dutch oven. So you need to be sure, make your research on what you're trying to make, and if you have all the things you need. If you don't have everything you need, also do your research on substitutes that can actually produce the same results. And that's just one of the few things. I was speaking about ovens earlier, saying that everybody had different ovens. That's why you need to know how your oven runs. This oven right here runs better than the last oven I had. The last oven I had didn't have like an accurate measurement for me to set the temperature, and I had to buy an oven thermometer to put into the oven. So every time the oven was on, I would check it to know when I need to get to 350 or when I'm getting to 170, depending on the heat measurement I'm using. Some recipes, especially recipes that come from America, they usually are in Fahrenheit, and we over here use centigrade, which is Celsius, degrees Celsius. So Celsius. So you need to know the conversion. If you see a recipe that is in Fahrenheit, you want to know there's a conversion table. Convert it to Celsius, it would give you the temperature that you're looking for. For example, my oven is set in Celsius, so if I have a recipe that comes in centigrade, if I have a recipe that comes in Fahrenheit, I have to do a conversion to Celsius so that I know where I'm going to put my timer to allow it to heat up. That is one thing you need to know. There's some ovens, there are different types of ovens. There's gas oven, there's fan oven. So ovens work different ways. Some don't run as hot while some would burn. Like I said, my former oven would burn everything I put it into. So if a recipe called for 350 and I get my oven to 350, but the recipe tells me to cook it for 15 minutes, with my former oven I will start from 10 minutes to start to check it, because my oven tends to run really hot really quick and it would burn the food. This one works basically the same way. It's wider, it has a lot of space, it has a lot of air. So when it says 15 minutes, it technically gives me 15 minutes, and sometimes maybe a little bit more, and it cooks more evenly than my last oven. So these are things you need to check when you find your oven. You might buy a gas cooker and think it looks all nice and be thinking, oh, the oven works for me. You have to know how your oven runs. Test out your recipes first before you start deciding to bake a cake for someone's birthday the night before the birthday. Better make sure you know that your oven works well, doesn't burn, or you just be burning on your cake last minute. So always make sure you test out your oven for different recipes before you actually decide to take that recipe and serve it to people. So you need to understand your oven properly. Another tip is, when you're about to bake, make sure you get out all your ingredients first. You can't start mixing and be running up and down. Make sure you do all your measurements first. And that brings me to one thing that I wanted to show you guys. I'm just going to take, this is a 1/4 cup, and I'm going to show you, this is very important. A lot of people do not know how to measure flour. So before this video would go any further, I am just going to show you, this is a tub of bread flour that I have. I try to label everything so that I know what is going where. So I'm going to show you how to measure your flour. If you're not using a scale, because scale will give you a more accurate measurement. If you're not using a scale that when you're measuring is telling you, oh, this, they say you need 125 grams of flour, the scale will tell you when you get there, oh, this is 125. If you pass, you say, oh, 126, you know that you take out a little, now, oh, now it's 125. Then you get more accurate. That's why scales are actually a more accurate form of measurement when it comes to baking. Baking is like science. It's like creating formula. 1 plus 1 has to be 2. You cannot expect 1 plus 3 to give you 2 in any way. So that's one thing you need to understand with baking. You cannot be eyeballing your recipes. So as long as you're not creating your own recipe and you're trying to follow the recipe on the internet, on a cookbook, on a baking book, these are the few tips that you need to. So your recipe calls for 1 cup of flour and you want to measure 1 cup of flour. Please, these are things you shouldn't do. You shouldn't be doing this and say 1 cup of flour. This is wrong. You'd be surprised that you're using a recipe, even if it's a video you're watching, you're seeing that their recipe is coming out moist. You now realize that your own recipe is coming out hard, because you actually do have more than 1 cup of flour here. And this is why you need to know how to measure out properly. So while this is wrong, I am going to give you a more accurate measurement of how to measure. This is what I like to do. Instead of scooping out from the bowl itself, I'd rather fill it up with a smaller scoop. And when you fill it up with a smaller scoop, like so, you take your hand or a finger, a knife, or whatever you're using, and just level it up. Level it, level it, level it. Now you have a more accurate measurement of, even if you're measuring like baking soda, baking powder, they have ask for a teaspoon, or like this a quarter teaspoon. Don't just, this is not it, you know. So even if you pick it up like this, always with a hand or with a knife, just smooth that up and you get a more accurate measurement. So I'm just going to do a voiceover for the rest of this video. Preheat your oven to 170 degrees Celsius, and then in a bowl mix your flour, your baking powder, your salt, and with a whisk mix that all together. In a separate bowl, mix your Greek yogurt, your sugar, your eggs, extract, and olive oil. With a hand whisk, mix that all together. Slowly stir in your dry ingredients in batches until just fully incorporated. Fold in your strawberries. Do not use frozen strawberries. Use your fresh strawberries cut into bits. Fold that in and spoon your batter into a prepared pan. Put it in the oven and bake for about 50 minutes till it's set. Remove from the oven, let it sit for 10 minutes and cut into your strawberry pound cake. It's delicious. It's made with fresh strawberries, and this will make a great dessert for your dinners, your families, and your friends. Thanks for watching.